I'm still being absent.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do that. So took this interim job at Bank of America, this sort of corporate role that they made up, which keeps happening, by the way. The last
Like, we
three
want
roles
you.
I had in corporate America, they didn't even have a name for the role. They would just make something up.
Dude, you
So
find talent. You find talent. Like you
that's
just,
it.
I mean, when I've hired people before, actually, Mike Halakakis, who was my main like number one employee, when I hired him, I was like, I don't know what I need you for, but something. Let's figure it out. Yeah.
And I think in the entrepreneurial world, on our side of the enterprise, I think that works really well.
Yeah.
On the corporate side, it doesn't. And here's the reason.
Mm-hmm.
And corporate folks listening to this, if you're somehow stumbled onto this podcast, hear me when I say this.
Yeah, I guess
this really matters. The thing that you think you want, the fresh approach, the fresh thinking, the new ideas, the breath of fresh air that you want from an entrepreneurial person in your company, everything that's going to make that person great at that, simultaneously in the wrong culture, going to make them utterly insufferable to you, because you're going to try to eliminate many of the behaviors that make them great.
Yeah.
To fit them into your culture. And if you don't go into it understanding that in order to get this result from this person, we're going to have to give them some leeway and some leadership that we would not necessarily give to others. And it just, they really can't do it.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the Chris Haddad Show. And today I have my friend JB Brown, who I barely know, which I'm excited about, because JB and I, we met. How did we first meet, JB? I know you ended up buying the Pig Method program at one point.
I did. We met online a few times, but really the first time we met in person was at our mutual friend, Laura Catella Georgi's first Diamond Day. And I wasn't able to make it to the second one, but we sat next to each other there. Same place that I met Amber in person as well.
Oh yeah, love that girl. Yeah, she had a popular episode we did a few weeks ago. Actually, I'm quite excited. I was in Costa Rica recently for the ClickBank thing, and the CEO of ClickBank told me he listened to that episode and a few others. So I was like, not bad.
She's awesome, and we connected. It's actually a funny story. So same thing, this world that we live in.
Yeah.
You sort of know of a lot of people, but you don't always have the opportunity to meet them in person. And at that event, I liked her speech a lot, but I didn't actually really interact with her at the event. Well, we were staying at the same hotel, and neither one of us realized it. And I was getting ready to fly home, and my Uber was almost there, and I went outside and saw her. And so I'm like, hey,
so who?
Saw Amber.
Oh, Amber. Okay.
No, I saw Amber.
I thought you meant Kelly, the ClickBank CEO, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure he's
no. So I saw
Amber.
Amber, and I said, hey, awesome talk, because she covered a lot of the themes that she did in the podcast episode, which was awesome, by the way. And I just said, hey, listen, I just want to let you know, you don't know me. We've met online a few times, but I really appreciated, what you said and how raw and real you were. And we just had a good chat and, a hug. And then she was kind of agitated. And so I was like, hey, is everything all right? And she goes, yeah, I'm just trying to get home. And my Uber keeps getting lost. So
oh, no.
I'm like, well, I mean, I've got an Uber and it looks like they're giving me the big one. So why don't you just come with me to the airport? And so she did. And so we had another lovely 40-minute conversation, and we share it's the funnest part of this, right? You get to know folks.
Agree. Yeah, I agree. I tell people who I'm teaching, I'm like, you got to get on the road, man, if you can. I know the pandemic made it hard, but people ask me, they're like, Chris, how did you get clients when you were younger as a copywriter? And I'm like, well, I went to events and I went to the bar and I got drunk with people and I made friends with entrepreneurs. And like, you don't talk about business. That's the main thing too. The biggest thing I try to teach people, and I'm sure you've been doing it, we'll get more into like your background in a second, is like, dude, business is about relationships. It's not about like, it's all about just like getting to know people. Like you and I, we've met, we've known each other for a while now. I think we'll probably make some money together someday.
Yes, I agree.
Somehow or another, we will make some money together someday. We've never talked about it. I just feel like eventually, people, I know people, we have these relationships, and eventually that will kind of become a thing. I always say the reason I became successful as a copywriter for a couple of different reasons. One was I'm good at it. Obviously, done the work, but also like I'm willing to go out and network. I'm willing to go out and like get the job and hang out with the entrepreneurs and not be that copywriter who's kind of hiding in the corner.
The introvert.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of copywriters are introverts. I get it. It's a career that kind of pulls those people in, but I get it.
Well, it's funny. So I'm married to a raging introvert. I am a mild extrovert.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
That I sort of, you might be able to relate to this. I can turn that up when I need to, but it's not naturally who I am. I'm more mild. I genuinely love people. I enjoy people. I love to hear their stories. I did have to laugh a little bit because I'm married to an introvert when I won't say the event. I don't remember which one it was, but they had this is becoming a thing where they have introvert rooms.
Oh, really?
And it's, you walk in and it's, I was just curious. I didn't belong there, but I was like, well, what does that look like? Like, what happens when you put an extrovert in an introvert's room? Does everybody freak out?
Yeah.
So I walk in and it's everybody just sort of, there's chairs around the perimeter of the room, sort of like facing the wall.
They're all in the chair. What is it? It's like you're at a 7th grade dance. And
That's
you're like
exactly
a guy
right.
who doesn't want to go talk to a girl.
Everyone needs a break and they can go in there and you know, which, hey, that's a clever thing to do, but it was just, it was funny. I was just like, man, that's a whole new level right there.
Well, my friends, my one of my best friends, Mason Rabinowitz, who I just talked to a few hours ago, he will tell stories to people who have only known me for a few years and be like, no, you got to understand, when I met Chris 20 years ago, he was the most painfully shy person you've ever met in your life. And that was absolutely true.
That's hard.
Massive social anxiety, massive social anxiety. And what changed that for me was I started a business. And all of a sudden I was 26 years old and I was a freelance copywriter theoretically. And it was either learn some social skills to get out there and get work or starve. And that was what changed everything for me, made it so that I had the opportunities I did, how I created the Michael Fiore character and all that kind of stuff really came from being forced to learn like sink or swim, right? It was either that or go broke. I got fired from every job I ever had. So it was either do that or go broke.
A lot of us, that's a common theme, or the folks that I talk to, entrepreneurs, business owners. And I don't think those two words are interchangeable. Sometimes they can be different things.
Absolutely
Sometimes
agree.
they're the same,
Absolutely
but they're not always. But there is often a common bond that we all share, which is many of us are certifiably unemployable.
I always call it the island of misfit toys.
That's it. Yeah.
Like I got fired from every job I ever had. I talked to Jeff Walker about this ages ago, Frank Kern, like all these people who have done pretty well. I'm always grateful I got fired from every job I ever had.
Of course.
Because otherwise I would have been an employee and I would be like commuting to some job I hate and working for some asshole I don't like instead of working for me, who I mostly like at this point. Yeah, it's a big thing. So let's talk a little bit more about, I know relatively little about you or your background, which I'm excited about. I like getting onto these shows with people who are just like, hey, let's just kind of figure it out. Like, what is your story? Like, how did you get involved in our crazy little entrepreneurial marketing world? I know you do buying and selling businesses and things like that, but not that much else. Like, tell me kind of your story about how you got into this stuff and some of the lessons you learned along the way.
Yeah, I'm a weird dude, man. Like, there's just a guy. You sit me in a room, and there's so many things that we could talk about.
I feel like you and I, like, again, I feel like from the moment you and I met, we're like, you and I are going to be friends.
Yeah,
like,
I felt the same way. Yeah, and that happens. You know, it really does. You kind of feel like what wavelength, and you get people. So for me, I, born and raised in a little small town in Maine, very blue collar.
I'm from Massachusetts. Yeah.
So probably part of that is you can sense that, you know,
that East Coasty thing. Yeah,
absolutely. And really, I can remember growing up and I didn't know anybody, I don't think, that had made whatever, you know, more than $100,000 a year or something like.
So your parents and such were just regular employee types?
Single mom who was a bartender or waitress my whole life.
So was your dad involved at all in your life, or was
No. So never met my dad, which became obviously such a huge factor in my life. And
my dad died when I was 19, and I don't want to interrupt, but I have a similar thing, though. Of course, it was 19 years later. But how his death affected me and the lack of masculine guidance for me in my life was devastating.
Enormously. And so I think what that probably did was to create a void that I wasn't aware of, and put a chip on my shoulder that I also wasn't aware of. Everybody else was, but I wasn't. It was very clear to everybody else, but not
people
to me.
People used to say I was angry. I'm like, you haven't seen me angry.
Yeah, like just wait a minute, wait for it. And so I knew I wanted to get out of there. Not that, I mean, it was a great place to grow up. When I look and grew up in the '80s, and what a great time to grow up.
Kind of rural part of Maine.
Yeah, so
most of Maine is pretty rural. So
pretty much, yeah. It was probably 5,000 people in the town.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You kind of had free reign of the town. You run around, do whatever. Now, the only problem was when your mom is the bartender of the bar, you really can't get away with anything because she's going to know and everybody's going to know. So decided to go to college, and what an interesting conversation that's become, because I went because it was what you did. I went because...
As you're 42-ish or so?
42. Today is my birthday. I'm 42
Happy birthday,
today.
my friend. Thank you for taking
time.
And
I spend it with you, brother.
I appreciate it.
And so at that time, if you wanted to get out, and And actually, I got to back up a little bit. So I was a decent athlete.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going to this boarding school because I wasn't doing very well in public school. Because back then, I don't know that there was a lot of awareness over what we would now call, ADHD and all of
Oh,
these.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Up and,
When I was growing, I'm just gonna, if I interject or whatnot, it's just,
oh, you're fine.
You're saying something interesting or whatever else. But for me, when I was growing up in Grafton, Massachusetts, like you didn't get help. You didn't get psychological help.
You
like,
sucked it up.
Yeah, you like as a guy, as a man, like you would never admit anything like that. If you went to a psychiatrist, you would. It was like, what is wrong with you?
Mm-hmm.
I was told my entire life. I was jokingly told I was ADHD all my life, but never did anything about it until I was 32 or so, and all of a sudden I was like, wait, there really is a thing going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would get. You can look back at a lot of my report cards from elementary, middle, high school that were something along the lines of. Extremely bright, gifted, lazy. Lazy was the thing that would come up. Like they would assume you were lazy. And when I look back, I realized what it really was I was bored, easily bored. And I had a hard time and still have a difficult time as a grown man sitting still for too long. If I'm on a conversation like this, I'm going to sit still for this amount of time because it's visual. But if it's an audio conversation, the joke around my house is the pacing. I'll be up and all around the house and just
I've got my electric desks that I move up and down. I have like a wobble board that I can stand on. I've got a couple different chairs.
Absolutely.
I've got like other discs that I can
things to touch with your hands.
Anything that keeps me moving because I am just not good at sitting still at all.
So funny story. I have these in my office. I'll show them to you. For those who aren't able to see what I'm holding, they're just, wire snippers.
Yeah.
And I had them because I was doing something in the office way back when I moved in. And for some reason, I never brought them home. Well, what I'll do, I catch myself doing during Zoom calls is I'll not realize that I've grabbed them and I'm just sort of playing with them. And we'll be having a conversation that's more serious in nature or whatever. And all of a sudden they'll come up above screen and I'll just be doing this. And I've had folks stop me in the middle and go, hey, not for nothing, but what are you doing with those? It's like, oh, I didn't even realize I had them. But no, so some
kind of weird new masturbation ritual.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I was fortunate in that this boarding school, which is still super, super elite, very old. You're from New England, so you're going to get this very old New England boarding school, like 250 years old.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I certainly didn't have the grades to get in and we didn't have any money.
Yeah. Well, how did you manage to make that work?
So they didn't give athletic scholarships. Definitely didn't do that. But I'm winking for those who can't see me. But I ended up going there for very, very, very little money. And even back then, and this is the 1997, it was probably 30 grand a year for room and board, which was insane. So things weren't great at home with my mom and her boyfriend at the time. And also, I just wasn't thriving, to say the least. And so I had the opportunity to go to this boarding school. And for the first time in my life, I find myself exposed to people from different countries, different cities, different places.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I've never experienced any of this. And so it was, I look back now.
Well, you grew up with just white, right? Like Maine and
white. We had one black person in my entire town.
Yeah.
And he was behaviorally whiter than anyone I knew.
We had one black person in our town, and unfortunately he killed himself, though not because of that, but it was.
Yeah,
amazing.
no, I mean, so I had no exposure to culture. And I'll tell you, it was an immediate mind shift for me because when I went there, a lot of the kids who I met in that first week or so were very wealthy, from very, very wealthy families. And I obviously wasn't. And the truth is, a lot of them, they didn't really want a lot to do with me because I was probably a little rough around the edges. By probably, I mean, absolutely. Yeah. And probably a hammer looking for a nail at that point in life, trying to find a reason. And the only kids who really would hang out with me and talk to me were actually black kids who were there as postgraduates from the inner city, because we had more in common, candidly, than I had with some of those other kids that looked more like me. But we, a lot of us had no dads, so we had to kind of fight for everything we had. We written off. So those became my friends. And that eye-opening continued into life. And so, you go to college, as I mentioned earlier. I guess that's the next thing. I'll just go to college. And I thought getting in was the goal because I'm like, I don't really know what to do with my hands once I got in there. So I got in, and at the end of my freshman year, a little bit unusual, I became I had joined a fraternity in the first semester.
There's fraternities at your boarding school. That's interesting.
No, this is in college.
Oh, this is in college. Sorry about that.
I'm already out of the boarding school. I go to college.
I still got COVID brain. I'm getting better.
No, you're good, brother. And I become president of the said fraternity at the end of my freshman year, which is unusual. But I had a knack for, even then, I had a knack for making money and figuring out, okay, this is the way you guys are hosting parties.
Are you somebody who people tend to follow? Because I discover as I get older, something I have a hard time accepting about myself is that people tend to want to follow me sometimes. And it's really
and the statement that you just made is really interesting, Chris, because I'm not to psychoanalyze you, but I would say the same thing to myself. I've said something similar to what you just said a second ago.
Yeah.
And yes, to answer your question, folks do tend to follow me. When I was younger, that could be bad because where you would follow me may not be where you should have been going.
Yeah.
But what I realized was I think people follow me because I'm just a confident guy. But the funny thing is saying, well, it made me uncomfortable that people follow me. I felt like that forever. And the reason was deep down, what I knew is that everyone saw this confidence and everyone saw this guy who was just out there and felt like he could do anything. But deep down, the reality was I wasn't sure if I could do anything. And I had this black hole that I was trying to fill with achievements, success, proving people wrong, all about that chip on my shoulder. And the more accomplishments that I could throw in this hole, I thought eventually it would just be filled.
And it doesn't work.
It doesn't. And really, I think that for me, and maybe for a lot of folks, that always goes back to something. And it's pretty clear that even as a baby, of course, you couldn't do anything wrong to make your dad not want to be there.
Yeah.
But he did, and he left. And I think your whole life somewhere you're thinking, well, why wasn't I enough? And then you have your own kids and you see how hard it is. And you realize that being a dad and a father, the truth is not everybody can do it. Not everybody is geared.
No, I mean, I think you should only have kids if you really, really want them, which is why I don't have them myself. I think I'd be a great dad, but I'm not going to do it.
And I'll tell you, and we're getting a little bit ahead here, but the interesting thing is a lot of folks listening, no matter what business you're in, no matter what function you have in that business, if you have children and you're really into being a mom or a dad, the darndest thing is your kids raise you more than you raise them. And that wound, those wounds that I had for so long, they really only started to heal when I had a son. And was
your son your first or second?
First, and then we had two daughters, and it's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
And your perspective changes and your outlook. And for me, the outlook I had, I was able to forgive my dad that I don't know.
That's amazing. That's impressive to be.
And it was because all the mistakes that I make, as a dad, how many times I've been on my knees at night, especially when they were little, and it's so hard because you're getting no sleep and your wife's getting no sleep and you're frustrated and you're having these real problems and you might be covered in vomit or, other things. And you're just like, dear God, shut up. There are times when I said out loud, would you just shut up and go to sleep? And the second that you do it, you feel like the biggest piece of trash in history. Like, I can't believe I just said that, this poor baby, but it's real. That's the reality that people don't talk about. It's understanding that reality as a father and how hard it is. And I can look back at somebody who would have at the time been about 20 years old.
Yeah,
I didn't have a child till I was 31
mm-hmm.
and I was successful already.
Yeah. You had some money in the bank. You're not worried about just like,
and I had a spouse.
Yeah.
So, but whether it was my dad that left or my mom that, raised me by herself on a waitress income and certainly made some mistakes, I have such a heart to understand, man, how hard must that have been to raise a man as a single
I can't
woman.
Imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine.
And
go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead, brother.
I was just thinking about like my own dad. And one of the things that really breaks my heart is that, he died when I was 19 and I never got to know him as an adult. I never got to see my dad as a human being, right? Like when you're a kid, my dad was a huge person. We're very similar in a lot of ways that are both good and bad, actually, to the point that like when my mom sees me now, I look more and more like my father, which freaks my brother out more than anything. But like, when you're a kid, your parents are forces of nature more than anything. And I grew up in a very emotionally violent household. My parents should not have been married. My dad wanted to be our friend more than anything else. And like, he just seemed like this force of nature. And then when he died, that was impossible to me. But my mom and I are friends now. She's 72, I'm 44. We're actually friends now. I'm so sad to never have that chance to become like friends with my dad, and to know him as a man, as opposed to seeing him as this kind of force of nature.
I get it, man. people have different opinions on this, and mine is unsurprisingly, I don't know for how far we're going to get into politics or whoever knows where this will go, but I'm always this weird sort of middle guy that's really difficult to put in a box because everything's born of my own experience with people and life. And some people say you should never be your kid's friend. And then some people are on the exact opposite of that and say you can't be too hard. I'm really probably in the middle. I'm tough on things that I believe are character issues and grit issues for my kids. But I think my kids, especially my son, would tell you that I'm probably his best friend. But I'm also really hard on him. And I believe that those two things can exist in the same realm, really.
I'm told that when I interact with children that I am very like just when I've at the babysat or whatever else, very much seems like I'm like, listen, here are the rules. We're going to stick to the rules. If you stick to the rules, we're going to have a great time. If you don't stick to the rules, we're going to stop until you stick to the rules. So let's just do that. And that seems
and that's parenting, man. Really, it's when you have three kids, especially when you have the first one, and then you go to have the second one, you think, well, we've had the first one, we kind of have figured this out. And we did it every 2 years, every time we went on vacation to the beach, which we just stopped doing. So you think you have one down. The darndest thing happens, and depending on what you believe in God or the universe or whatever, one of those entities plays a joke on you because the second one and then the third one are all completely different, and you really have no idea. So we've tried it all, and the thing that I have just found to be the most impactful is understand. Like, I don't mind explaining to my kids. A lot of people, I don't like my kids ask why. I love when my kids ask why, as long as they don't do it to the point of being obnoxious, because it's them trying to understand the world around them. And if I'm not willing to explain to them why a certain behavior is inappropriate, or why, some hard lessons, what we'll tell our kids is, this is a hard lesson, and it's important that you learn it here, surrounded by people who love you, as opposed to us letting you get out into the world without learning that lesson, surrounded by people who do not love you, because the world does not love you. And I tell kids that.
Place. Yeah.
No, not at all. So, I think going through college, getting out of college, and by the way, so I failed out of college.
Nice.
My sophomore year. I think I may have broken a record. I don't know if Guinness is.
What were you majoring in when you were in college?
So funny story. When I first started, it was either finance or business management, one of the two. They were very closely related at that school. And after about 1.5 semesters of mostly, accounting 101, finance 101, it was at the time, it was so boring to me that I just couldn't take it. I couldn't take it. And I think that's probably part of that, and the fraternity thing is probably part of why I may have broken a record. I got a 0.0 one semester.
Holy shit.
I mean, honestly, I'm kind of impressed with myself.
One of my best friends, Dan Pichette, he dropped out of college, sophomore year of college. I was very mad at him about it. And even he got like a 0.4 by like, he didn't go to class at all or take any of the finals or anything.
Yeah. So I did. I remember this was probably 2001. And so I can't remember. It was probably PS2. I'm trying to remember my video game chronology. Right. I think it was PS2. Yeah. And my roommate and I, they had these rooms that were not in a dorm. They had dorms, but then they had some that, like, if you could get in, it was awesome because it looked like an old motel where the doors open to the outside. I think that actually literally might have been what it was. Yeah. And so you had this room that you'd go into and you come out to the outside, and we'd have a lot of parties, but then we would stay up until 4 or 5 in the morning playing, of all things, this ridiculous NASCAR game. I'm not even a NASCAR guy, but we would have these epic battles in NASCAR, and then we would order like chicken parm sandwiches and bad pizza from Spanky's Pizza. If you're still around Spanky's Pizza, good for you. And not go to class. And this was so I get the 0.0. Of course, they statutorily kick me out.
Yeah, they have to.
And I'm like, shit, I don't even have anywhere to live if I'm not in college, so I don't know what to do.
What was your mom's reaction when you dropped out or when you got kicked out?
To be honest, I'm not sure I told her. Because at that point, when I was out, she was going through a lot of her own problems, and it was just sort of like, honestly, I was kind of an adult at 16, 17 and sort of just doing my thing.
I was basically my mom's parent for a couple of years in high school.
Same. Yeah, very similar.
Her and I have talked about, like, she was very depressed and in a really horrible place and was not in a place to be a parent. And so I was the parent for a while.
Yeah, same. Been there. Parentified is a word that, I think a lot of folks can relate to.
Yeah.
So I remember, and this was the beginning of me starting to understand who I was. And so I was with my now wife then. She was my girlfriend, and maybe even fiance at that point. But I can remember her being so frustrated because what happened was I went in and I gave this big impassioned speech that I had prepared for the dean of students about
Oh, wow. Okay.
all the things that I was going to do and the mistake. It was all bullshit.
Yeah.
But you know what he did? He looked at me and he said, well, whatever. I'll let you come back for one more semester because at the end of the year, so this was mid-semester, halfway through the year. Yeah. So at the end of the year, you'll have to have this whatever GPA minimum. And the only way mathematically that you could get that is to get a 4.0. And we both know that's not going to happen. So whatever, it doesn't hurt me.
How was that chip on your shoulder then?
Yeah. Listen, so I just remember looking at him and I was expecting just, well, please just let me stay. And that's was my entire goal. The entire conversation and my demeanor flipped as soon as he said that, because he activated that thing in me that was like, what the fuck did this guy just say? And sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that on your podcast. But
you can say whatever you want. You can say fucking whatever you want. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm like, who the fuck do you think you're talking to? Like, I didn't say that, but I remember thinking it. So that semester, I took a full daytime course load and then added 3 courses.
Holy crap.
So I was taking 7 college courses at the same time. And I got somehow the nighttime courses, some of the business law and other ones would give you a little bit extra. Sure. So I ended up getting like a 4.1, which I don't.
Holy crap. Yeah.
I remember walking into his office, so dramatic, really.
Yeah.
With the report card and transcript and saying, Dr. Edwards, don't ever bet against me. I was thinking he was just going to be like this Ferris Bueller moment where he's like, oh, yeah. And then he looks right at me with this smirk on his face. And he goes, bet against you? I was just wondering how long it would take to piss you off so that you actually started to do some work.
Yep.
And I remember being like, he did it on purpose. And that was the beginning of me understanding that someone who's probably worked with young people for that long can read someone like me, who's probably a little unusual, and is like, I just need to figure out what this guy's buttons are. Mm-hmm. And I understood that. And so my wife now, she got frustrated during this time because I would go and get a B on the same test if we were in the same class, and she'd get an A, but she would have studied for weeks and I didn't even open the book. Didn't even open the book. Yep. And so when I started to study, the A's came and she was just like, what is your problem? And I said, if I knew that, then we wouldn't be in this situation. But it really was the formation of me understanding myself. Like, okay, there are some things about me that are unusual and different.
But also how to motivate yourself, right? Which I think is really, really interesting. Like the older I get, the more I understand myself, I feel like, and I know what I can do to get myself to do something versus what I can't. Like, for instance, I did my course back in December. Before that, I had barely worked for quite a long time, right? Because I was dealing with a wide variety of health issues. My wife was dealing with health issues. And the way I got myself to do the course was not by being like mad at myself and being like, hey, I'm going to work. It was by basically just like taking very small responsibilities and adding them. So I had to do this thing or I had to do that thing. And eventually I had no choice but to get the work done. I basically kind of like pushed myself into a corner to finally work, because I know how I work. I know how my particular brain works and what's actually going to get me to do stuff.
Yeah. Same, man. I play little mental games with myself, and people might find them quirky and tricky, but I'll do it all the time. So when I left corporate America, and I had built a really good corporate career, but what
was your career in corporate America?
So I started off working in the mortgage industry, and I ended up moving my way up. And this is back in the early to mid 2000s. And I ended up working my way up and running a mortgage company. Mm-hmm. And in 2007 was, everybody who was reporting to me was decades older than I was.
Everybody was making a fuck ton of money in mortgages.
Yeah, sure were.
And it was right before the crash. Yeah.
So here's an interesting, I think, story that women too, but men especially can relate to. And I think this is important. Because I grew up with very little means, I'm talking about water on cornflakes poor, and everything that you had to get, you had to scrape and you had to earn. And there was an honor to that in a blue collar town. There still is. Yep. Because of that. And for some reason, that 100K was a big number in my mind. I don't know where I got it, but I just remember thinking, if you can make $100,000, you're rich, like beyond your wildest dreams. Like, you'll never have any problems. Yeah. Well, so something interesting started to happen. So I go to college, and I get a little part-time job. Well, that part-time job brings in an extra 20 bucks a week. Well, Chris, 20 bucks a week when you're broke and in college,
A lot of money.
it's a direct and tangible increase in your quality of life. I can get a pizza, I can get, 12 pack of beer, whatever it is.
Yep.
So then maybe get a little bit of a better part-time job. And then I'm making 100 bucks a week. Whoa. Now I can take my girlfriend out to dinner every now and then. I can buy, a pair of sneakers that I want. Then I get a real part-time job where it's like corporate. Then I'm making, $500, $600, $700 extra per week.
Yep.
Again, now I can get a car payment. Now I can get a little bit more. So every time this happens and I have an increase in because I'm starting so low.
Yeah.
Every time that I have a band change in my income, my happiness, my quality of life goes up.
Yep.
Well, then I get out of college and I go work for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. Never forget it. Cleaning cars in a suit and learning about sales and upsells. And I didn't realize it, but I had switched. You asked me earlier what I majored in. I switched after that dropout. I switched to clinical psychology.
Oh, interesting.
And
my favorite topic, quite honestly. Not
I find it,
but psychology in general is my favorite thing in the world. Yeah.
Well, and now here it is, decades later. I buy and sell businesses, build them all the time, consult on other people's businesses, have really high net worth clients and partners. I learned a lot more about business from psych than I ever did from accounting and finance. Those are things you can learn from YouTube. The why people do things, it's a lot harder. But so getting back to my point, because this is important, because it was devastating to my behaviors.
Yeah.
So because I'm getting used to every time I'm increasing my income, I'm getting the serotonin bump because life is better.
Yep.
Measurably better. Well, then I get that job with Enterprise, and it was $37,500 a year for a 52-hour work week. That's what it was. But remember, I've never heard of that much money at once, and I'm thinking an annualized number, which they're very clever in giving you at that time.
Yep.
And I get health benefits. Now I can go and get checked out when I don't feel well. I can get a little apartment. So this keeps happening.
You don't have to run if an ambulance comes. I saw a video.
No.
It's like, it's America. Don't take me in an ambulance.
Don't take me in an ambulance.
I will walk to the hospital. I'm not taking an ambulance.
Yeah, please don't put me in there. Yeah. So here we are, fast forward to me running this mortgage company, and I'm at 25 years old. I made $100,000.
Yep.
And I thought, because again, every time I made more money, I had this increase in happiness. I thought that I should be ecstatic and, self-fulfilled. And, the old psychological term is I've reached self-actualization.
Yep.
I don't think there've been only a few times in my life when I can remember feeling more empty and disappointed and unhappy. Getting
what you think you want can be fucking brutal. Absolutely.
Well, it is, especially as a male, when what happens is if you have something inside of you that is a hole and is, an emotional or, a hang up. If a good friend of mine, Kevin Nations, you probably know Kevin.
Kevin. Yeah. Good friend of mine.
Awesome guy, great mentor of mine. He has a saying that I love, which is, if you're spending money on nice things and trappings in celebration of abundance, that's awesome and that's healthy, and you should do that. If you're doing the same thing behaviorally, but you're doing it because you're trying to fill a void, well, that's a problem. And I think a lot of guys, and then now you're seeing it with women too, who have been told, be that boss lady, go get all these things that we're telling you that you want. And then they turn 40 and they're like, I didn't have a family. Now I want one. Yep. Why am I unhappy? Or for men,
I did have a family and I didn't have the career. I mean, women particularly, I feel like women get held to this ridiculous standard.
Outrageous standard. Yeah. And as a dad with a son and 2 daughters, it's a little confusing to try to figure out, how am I supposed to raise these kids? And you finally get to a point where the culture just becomes secondary. And you're like, look, this is going to change 10 times in the course of just you turning into a little tiny adult.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's just sort of try to go back to the basic principles of what makes a human being healthy, well-adjusted, and successful. And those things don't really change. So when I realized that there was no correlation anymore, so it's Maslow, really. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once those are met, the problem is this inverse thing happens where there's no longer a direct correlation between you making more money and your happiness. Now,
absolutely,
there's cool things you can do. There's
fun,
comfort. It's fun, but it really, I've been broke and I've been really wealthy and I've been everything in between. And I've actually cycled between them
Yep.
multiple times.
Like most of us. Yeah. Mhm.
Absolutely. And it truly, man, that I'm at a point now, fortunately, where my identity and my happiness, it's really not predicated upon how much money I've got. It's just a matter of, I don't even now, I just had this conversation with a client who's awesome.
Yep.
He's got, a very, very successful company. And he said he's just now in his mid 50s starting to feel like it's okay to spend money.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
because he had to scrape and scrape and grew up very blue
So long.
collar
Yeah.
and and he said, you know something, I know exactly how you feel. To this day, sometimes if I buy um, a pair of, let's say Jordan ones,
Yeah.
because I like sneakers. So if
Okay.
I get a pair of Jordan ones, they're $200.
Yep.
There's a little part of me that's like,
Yep.
that's
Yep.
kind of a lot for sneakers. And, but what I am good about is I'll spend money for comfort and I'll spend money for experiences, because those are the two things that are most
Well, that's
valuable.
where you're going to, I've had a lot of stuff. Like we have too much
Yeah,
stuff already.
too much.
Yeah. I like getting rid of stuff as much as anything, as much as anybody in the world. That's what makes me happy. Purge day is like my favorite day of the year, where
Yep.
we take all the crap to the garage and then we're just going to get the entire garage like cleaned out. I feel
Love it.
later at that point than I did before. But let's go talk a little bit about the identity thing for a second. 'Cause that's a topic
Yeah.
that really, really interesting. I had a long talk with Brad Howard, who I think you know, about this when I was in Costa Rica recently, because Brad's gotten tremendously successful, and there's this idea of like being Brad fucking Howard, and for me, there's like being Chris fucking Haddad, basically,
Yeah.
right? Especially 10 years ago or so, when I had no self-esteem and I was undiagnosed bipolar and I was sick, but I was making millions, right?
Yep.
I was like, my life sucks. I'm in a shitty marriage. Everything sucks. I'm sick all the time, but I was making a lot of money, right? And
So
that
you
was
were successful.
exactly. And that's who I was. I was the guy who made a lot of money. I
Yeah.
was this great marketer. I was this great copywriter. And then life got in the way. And all of a sudden I was making 500,000 instead of 2 million, right? Which is still a lot of fucking money, but it's not that.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And that was one of the most brutal things to go. I mean, it was one of the most valuable things I've ever been through, because it forced me to divorce myself from my income as far as having value as a human being. But it was also one of the most devastatingly difficult things I've ever personally done.
So I can remember my first real foray into entrepreneurship. I was still working in what was my final corporate job.
Yep.
And I had worked myself to a point where I had moved all the way through up into sales, and then I'd gotten into medical sales and then medical device sales, and then ended up moving over to medical affairs and consulting. And my final corporate job was an ego job, really. It was this company that makes these big surgical robots. And
Ooh, okay.
my job was to go into hospital systems where there was a problem and figure out, all right, something's not working here. So is it a people problem? Is it a equipment problem? Is it a resource problem? Is it a training? It's usually all of those things.
Yeah.
And then to be there for 2 weeks shadowing and sort of like be Rambo, behind enemy lines, and then figure it out, help them work through it, give them this recommendation, and then leave. And as I was doing that, a couple things happened that were very formative. It was only supposed to be a 3-day a week travel. And I signed up for that.
Yeah.
So 3 days a week. Well, what happened was the more that they figured out I was able to do, because I had such a strange and diverse background, that there were a lot of different problems I could handle. So if I was in town and I was dealing with a resource issue where they put 2 robots in a room that wasn't designed for these 10-foot tall robots, and we had to figure that out, staffing. If I noticed that there was a trust issue or a conflict issue with the local sales representation we had, I would just take a little bit of time and I would figure out the root cause and I would fix it. And I would bring those folks in and figure out, how do we handle this conflict and these agendas that could be competing in a little bit of a different and maybe more productive way.
Yeah.
The problem with doing that is anyone who's ever worked in corporate America knows that if you become too good at something, they want more.
Yep.
And then more. And they don't want to pay you more. They just want more.
I have a theory on this, really tangentially. I used to work for a company in LA called Lockstream that was a digital rights management company. And my boss was named Mark Lieber, nice guy. He was an entertainment executive, right? And he was completely incompetent when it came to anything technological whatsoever, whereas I knew how to fix the photocopier. And what I figured out at that point in my life is, if you are the guy who knows how to fix the photocopier, you will always fix the photocopier. If you are the guy who, when you go near the photocopier, it bursts into flames, you will get promoted.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so to your point, I started to have this secret acronym that I would think of myself, and I still have it to this day,
Yeah.
which is that when people ask me what I do, what I can't say is what I really am, because there's so many things I've done. What
Sure.
I really am is a PPS. I'm just a professional problem solver.
Awesome.
I'm really good at figuring out how to solve almost any problem, especially a human problem, because that's where it gets convoluted.
I know how to fix a human problem, don't you?
Well, yeah, exactly. So I'm still with this company, and the challenge was what was supposed to be 3 days ends up turning into 6 days a week gone. And I have a new son at this point. He's
Oh, wow.
2 years old, 2.5. And
I'm sure your wife is loving that. Yeah.
there was a point where she basically sat me down and said, I feel single.
Yep.
And you can either, it wasn't this ultimatumly, but what I heard was you can either continue to do this cool ego job. And it is an ego trip when you walk into an ER and world famous doctors look at you and go, what do we do?
Yep.
And it wasn't necessarily because of me. It's just the incredible training that I got from that company combined with a weird background.
Yeah.
Was what it was. I was the guy where if anything went wrong, I was going to have to fix it. And it was a big ego thing, especially coming from that place, remember, where I'm looking for ways to stoke my ego because it makes me feel a little bit less abandoned. So the 6 day thing gets old. And I remember what happened. I was supposed to be off for a week because they were like, hey, man, you've been burning at both ends for months. Take a week. Don't take vacation. Just stay home. I was like, okay, awesome. So I had told my son, who's old enough to understand, I said, buddy, man, dad's going to be home all week. You and I are going to go fishing. We're going to get ice cream. It's going to be amazing. And he was so excited about that. Well, the day after I got home, I got a phone call and we were based out of Silicon Valley. And I got a phone call out of Sunnyvale, and it was, hey, I knew what it was as soon as I got the call. And they were like, listen, we've got a huge problem in Seattle. We think you're the only one who can fix this problem, which up until that day was a stoke of my ego. I would have loved to hear that. Yeah. In this instance, I didn't, because I knew what was coming next, which is I've booked you a flight. You actually have to leave tonight because they want to start the cases a day early. So I've been home for 12 hours. So now I'm immediately thinking to myself, okay, this is not cool, but I'm into go mode now. All right, I'm going to go pack my bag again. I'm going to go call my car service and make this all happen. I turn around, Chris, and I look upstairs, and we have a 25-foot ceiling and a railing. And I see my little boy with his hands on the rail, seeing me with my suitcase, and he's just got tears streaming down his face. And to this day, it's a little hard to tell that story.
Oh, absolutely.
But that was a moment in my life where I felt like the biggest failure.
Yep.
And I just lied to my son, and I'm projecting because I'm saying these MFers are making me lie to my son. Yep. The truth is I hadn't set good boundaries, and I had kind of allowed this to continue to happen. So we had 3 steps on our front porch, man. Between the top step and the pavement, I decided I was done.
Good for you.
So I knew I was going to go take care of the things that I was scheduled to do. Yeah. Which
you're going to fulfill your promises. Yeah.
And then I was done. So I took a little bridge job that was at Bank of America, knowing that I wasn't going to be there for long.
What did your bosses say when you quit? I mean, did they try to keep you around and change things, or
everything they could think of initially? And then predictably, what happened was then it starts to turn. But then all of a sudden, oh, well, this guy's just difficult. He's not aligned with the company missions. Look at what all we've done for you, and you're not being grateful. And I'm like, motherfuckers, you've been underpaying me to do 10 people's jobs for 3 goddamn years. Are you kidding me? That's what I was, in reality, in mid-level management. So Kevin, Nations again, we share this belief. There are very few things that are in life, people-wise, that are more just insidious and useless than mid-level management.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Utterly useless
human management layer, as it were,
that have no real talent or ability.
And all they're really doing is trying to get their name on things so they seem they should have jobs.
That's it. And
have you read Bullshit Jobs, the book Bullshit Jobs?
No, but I feel like I should have written it.
Yeah, it's about this exact thing where there are like millions of jobs that people, and I used to do these jobs when I was like a temp and shit, that have no reason to exist whatsoever.
None.
Like the company newsletter. Like, who fucking cares? Nobody's going to read your company newsletter.
Ever.
Yeah.
No, nobody cares.
Yeah.
And so you sort of have this situation where you can do one of two things if you're a dad. And in my case, because of all the woundedness from my own upbringing, it was, I'm not going to be that. Whatever that might look like. I mean, I'm still being absent.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do that. So took this interim job at Bank of America in this sort of corporate role that they made up, which keeps happening, by the way. The last
Like, we
three
want
roles
you.
I had in corporate America, they didn't even have a name for the role. They would just make something up.
Dude, you
So
find talent. You find talent. Like
that's
just,
it.
I mean, when I've hired people before, actually, Mike Halakakis, who was my main like number one employee, when I hired him, I was like, I don't know what I need you for, but something. Let's figure it out. Yeah.
And I think in the entrepreneurial world, on our side of the enterprise, I think that works really well.
Yeah.
On the corporate side, it doesn't. And here's the reason.
Mhm.
And corporate folks listening to this, if you're somehow stumbled onto this podcast, hear me when I say this.
Yeah, I guess some
This really matters. The thing that you think you want, the fresh approach, the fresh thinking, the new ideas, the breath of fresh air that you want from an entrepreneurial person in your company, everything that's going to make that person great at that, simultaneously in the wrong culture, going to make them utterly insufferable to you, because you're going to try to eliminate many of the behaviors that make them great.
Yeah.
To fit them into your culture. And if you don't go into it understanding that in order to get this result from this person, we're going to have to give them some leeway and some leadership that we would not necessarily give to others. And they really can't do it. And they don't even.
It reminds me of a story from Ogilvy, David Ogilvy, the famous advertising guy. And I guess there was somebody, he had his copywriters, and somebody was like mad at his copywriters because they were playing ping pong or something during the middle of the day. And they were like, no, you guys got to be at your desk. And Ogilvy was like, shut the fuck up. They're working right now, but working for them involves playing ping pong right now. They need to be able to think. Like I go for 4-hour walks, and that's my work time half the time. Right. Yeah.
My leadership style is very much like that. I'm a huge fan of, so probably 10 years now, maybe no longer, 12. I've been an executive coach just because I'll find things, Chris, that I'm not good at. And I'll try to figure out what's the most efficient, direct way to become good at that. So public speaking, stage presence, and difficult conversations. I made myself go through a stand-up comedy program in Atlanta.
Awesome.
Because I'm thinking like, what's the most
And so you weren't a performer before, right? Like you don't have any kind of background in that? Interesting.
None at all. And went through that program to figure out how to say things with humor and to say things, in a way that folks would take better. Leadership wise, I got into really deep personality profiling so that I could understand, and the psych helped a bit, but understanding people and why they make the decisions that they make and how they're likely to receive information from you and stimulus, super helpful. So you take all those things, and I have this belief that the idea of treating everybody the same is fair is such bullshit. Because the reality is, I'll treat everybody fairly according to who they are and the contribution that they bring to whatever goal we're trying to achieve. But I'm most certainly not going to lead a second-year intern the same way that I'm going to lead somebody who's 52 years old and has 4 kids and is a rock star. You can't even, it's absurd to even assume that you would lead those two people the same way. I'm not going to lead myself or suggest something to you that works for me. This whole, everyone needs to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, no, they don't, because I don't want to go to sleep at 7:30, which is exactly what I would have to do to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
I love, actually, you're probably the similar to me. Like I am such an anti hustle guy, right?
Oh, I hate hustle. It's on my.
I'm an anti-hustle guy. I'm an anti-crushing it guy. People ask me, they're like, "What do you do?" I'm like, I get up when I feel like it. I work when I want to. I have some fun, and I hang out with my wife.
I don't like hustle culture at all. So Jason Myers, so I think you probably know.
Oh, Jason, yeah, I saw him last week.
Jason is a partner of mine, and we're building out. So we never got to this, but I build cool things with cool people now, and it really, that can look different any given day.
We're gonna build something. I don't know what yet.
We will. So it can be direct response offers. Right now, I have something really cool I'm building with a roofer client who's got a great roofing business, and then Jason and I are working on what will be an amazing. It's a kind of an aggregation of software that's going to be SaaS providers that we take, put them all together, and then we go public to NASDAQ. And Jason's done this before. Amazing guy.
So Jason Myers, an old friend of mine, he owns a plane, which I know because I saw him, and I was like, "Hey, Jason, my wife asked me if we can go on a private plane sometime," and I'm like, "Yes, I will make a phone call."
Planes, Ferraris. I think he's on the board at Ferrari now, which I only learned.
I don't know. He's got all sorts.
He's such a cool, he's exactly the kind of friend that I enjoy because he's such a real nonchalant kind of dude. He's like,
you would never know anything about how successful he is if you just met him randomly until he starts talking about his plane, and then you'd be like, "Oh, okay."
So. These are all things when you really begin to think about how do you lead people and how do you make business move forward. Ultimately, it's about putting people in the right roles,
Mhm.
treating them well and with dignity.
Yep.
And also, I like to try to meet people where they are. And that's not just in my professional life. It's personal too.
Yeah.
This last few years, if you haven't left it at least with some different understanding of someone else's viewpoint than what you went into it with before, you're
Hopefully.
probably missing an opportunity.
I think most people are missing an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to agree with it. We've gotten to this weird place where we think that by just hearing a different opinion than what we're used to or a different approach that we are implicitly agreeing with it.
People are
And
really
that's
afraid to hear anything opposite. Like this is
they
something,
are.
and again, we're not going to get into politics itself on the show because I just don't like to. Because what's the point? But I do
Yep.
find it really interesting. Like when I go, I'm more liberal than most people in at the high level of direct response, right?
Yeah.
As far as like copywriters and stuff go. And like when I go out to business conferences, I'm very often surrounded by people who disagree with me and who I
Yeah.
disagree with, but they're not used to that. Right?
Mm,
Like they're not used to, like I am, because I'm in this world and I regularly talk to people who are good friends of mine who I'm just like, I think you're insane, but I love you. But
yeah.
they're not used to that. And having people who react to me in this very uncomfortable way when I'm like, I think what you're saying is dumb, I don't insult them, is really interesting because they just have like, they're just so unused to getting any kind of pushback of any kind whatsoever. It's really interesting.
Really sneaky important thing that you just said that I think
Yeah.
a lot of folks miss is when you talked about disagreeing with somebody and you'll talk about something being stupid, but you're not saying it to
Yes.
them. I have
I
a
do that
saying.
very, very much on purpose until somebody crosses a line.
Yeah, and I do it with so I do a lot of conflict resolution within organizations and team
Yeah.
dynamic work. So it's hard to hire me one-on-one anymore, but the one thing that I will do often is I'll come in for a very specific challenge that an organization or a team. So they're about to go through extremely high growth and they want to make sure everybody's on the same page, which
Sure.
they never are, by the way.
Yeah.
Or there's already conflict and they're trying to figure out, or how do we fix this? The number one thing that I will always say is, guys, it's really important that we remember to be hard on issues,
Yep.
easy on people. Those are
Yep.
two different things. And there's a way to do that artfully where I can honor you, Chris, in any disagreement or conversation we have and still be hard on something that you bring up that I might disagree with.
Totally, but it's not about disrespect. Again, this is something I try
No.
I slip up occasionally, right?
Me too.
Occasionally, I'll talk to somebody and I'll say,
We're human.
You're just saying this or whatever else, and then I have to stop myself. And I always ask people the same thing. I'm like, don't use the word you. Just don't use the word you, and we'll be good. Talk about ideas. Talk about what you disagree. Defend your own stuff, but don't assume things about my character as a human being because I disagree with you, which I think is
Absolutely. And it's valuable. I'll give you an example. So I had a post accidentally go viral.
Ooh.
This was in 2020 or 21.
Mhm.
And it was right in the smack dab middle of the most contentious part of the Black Lives Matter.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Rioting. It was right in the middle of that.
Yeah.
And full candor, before that all happened, growing up, not knowing a lot of Black people, having some friends that are Black, but still not really having a full understanding. And because of how hard driving I am, I have a certain quality of life.
Sure.
Candidly, I thought to myself, well, don't get pulled over. Don't argue with whatever, don't do that. That was my ethos. There was nothing malicious about it.
No, but that's just you're a white guy in America. I'm Middle Eastern, so I have like 1%. I have experienced racism towards me maybe 3 times in my life, right?
Yeah.
Because of being Middle Eastern, that gives me a very slight viewpoint on it. But if you're just a white guy in America, like I got arrested at Burning Man years ago, right? And before that, I trusted the cops. I was like, oh, the cops are here to help you. And then that happened, and I was like, no, they're not. They're not.
Yeah. So what happened during this time? Well, before this, so our neighbor, who we have become very, very close to because we moved in and his wife passed away within like a month.
Oh no.
And it's a Black family.
Yeah.
And at the time he had a son that's the same, maybe 1 year older than my son. So his son was 3.
Yeah.
And we just did what you do, we right away, hey, not just what do you need, but here are the 5-10 things we can do for you this week.
Absolutely. Being good.
Watch him. And so Sammy is his name. And he and my son are best friends. They have been since they can remember. And he's at my house all the time. And he's another son to me. So when all this happened, I got pulled over that week. And I remember being pulled over and I was absolutely speeding.
Yeah.
And I remember being pulled over and I saw the police officer behind me and I thought to myself, like you have that little anxiety when you see the police lights. But at no point did I feel in fear. I wasn't scared anything bad would happen. I did put my hands on the steering wheel just because of the times we live in. I want to make sure that he knew I was not a threat in any way. And I live in Gwinnett County, Georgia. So it's, you never know what these guys are seeing.
Well, everybody's got guns out there.
Yeah. So I'm pulling over and I have my hands there, but he comes up and he was honestly kind of, I will say he was kind of like more aggressive and rude than he really needed to be, but whatever. But again, never felt in any danger.
Yep.
Uneventful. Get my ticket, move on. And as I'm pulling into my driveway, I'm thinking to myself, me explaining to my son, Camden, what to do in that situation, if I'm really honest, isn't the same as what I would explain to Sammy to do. I care deeply about both of them. I love them both. I want the best for both. And that bothered me. It bothered me very much. So I wrote a post that was just heartfelt about it. I want to say the last time I looked, it was like 1 million times that it was shared. Damn, and I'll tell you the cool thing that happened from it.
Yeah.
One, I realized that people send you messages on Facebook that you can't see if you're not friends with them. I found that out.
Yep.
And I go to click on it and I had 6,000 private messages.
Whoa.
You can't read that many.
No way.
I'm just picking and choosing. All of them, maybe, well, I say all, 90% were from Black people in America that saw the post. And we're saying, hey, at least thank you that it's good to know that someone who looks like you, meaning me, cares at least and is willing to listen. And that's kind of what the post was about. It was like, I think maybe I've been wrong about some things and that I don't understand some things. And I would like to understand. And if there's something that I'm not doing that I should be, not to be over the top and anything like that, but I would like to know.
Yeah.
And so that was heartening to sort of build those connections with folks and some amazing friends that I met who are, pretty prominent folks in the Black community who I've just become good friends with and just establishes a dialogue of like, okay, maybe I don't know everything. Here's the other thing that happened that was not a positive. There were some comments that I got publicly and mostly privately from folks that shocked me. Truly shocked me that I would see someone write something like that in 2020, whatever it was. And that was just as eye-opening because it was, I didn't think that that's who you were, but I guess that is who you are. So it's very much one of those.
It's fucking crazy. It's like watching some girl who's in a Star Wars show get like death threats. And I mean, what bothers, again, we're not going to get super deeply into this, but what bothers me is people I know who are like, racism in America doesn't exist. I'm like, what are you saying? What are you doing? Like, nobody's saying that you personally are an inveterate racist unless you are.
No.
But this idea that we can't even talk about it is so disgusting to me. It's like, this is a thing that's happening. This is a real thing in real life. Yes, it is more difficult being Black than white in America. Why is that such a controversial, difficult thing to say? But again, I think it goes back to marketing in a way, right? Which is everyone wants to be the victim. This is something I teach all the time. Everyone wants to be the victim. Everyone wants to be aggrieved. Everyone wants there to be some other they can blame for everything. It's sad.
That's really, so marketing in this crazy world. The reason that I got into marketing, copywriting in particular, was never that I had any designs of becoming someone who charges people to write. It was because I felt like it was a very artful and interesting way to learn. Again, it's just going deeper with motivations and psychology and behavior.
To me, it's a way to learn how to see the world, right?
It is.
I've tried, the one that I try to teach people more than anything beyond the writing is like, listen, I'm going to change the way you view people, and you're not going to be able to go back. So just know that before you get started, but you're going to have a much more cynical and different view of what human beings are and how they react and all that kind of shit.
When you also know, you know when to look for when you're being manipulated.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I started to recognize, I don't even watch mainstream news anymore, period. Really. I'm kind of on a very long term. It started off only a week or two, but it's turned into like 2 years of news purge and news fast, because the truth is, what I can directly impact is my friends, my family, my employees, the people that I do business with in my community, period, full stop, end of story. I can't really control all these other things. And so I can either spend a bunch of time worrying about them, or I can just be productive and kind of do my thing. So it goes back to that first thing that I ever tried to do when I was leaving corporate America was an epic failure. And it was a franchise. I bought the franchise. There were a bunch of things that questions I didn't know to ask because I was so inexperienced. And
Yeah, you're new. Yeah.
franchises can be a bit predatory, as can business.
Mhm.
And so I go in and I had like 9 employees that I inherited, only 2 of whom I realized were
Any good?
necessary.
Yeah.
And so you have this huge overhead. And I can remember laying at night, all sorts of things happen, but I can remember laying at night to get to a point you made earlier, Chris. I'm thinking to myself, I have X amount of life insurance. I have ruined us financially. I'm thinking this at the time.
Yeah.
I've made such a bad decision. I can't believe I did this. You piece of shit. What did you do to your family? Because I'm still even at that time, I'm thinking that my identity and my worth is tied to how much money I make.
Absolutely. Which is a guy particularly, like that's
it is.
You know,
it's
we're
very
programmed
much
to
a
be,
male
we have this provider idea.
We
whether
do.
it's genetic or whatnot, it's in there.
Yeah.
It's like how we feel good about ourselves.
Yeah. So I remember laying awake that night and thinking like, okay, this is how much the life insurance policy is worth. Like my family would be better off without me. That's the darkness of the types of
I had
thought.
a friend of mine say something very similar a week or so ago, who I was very concerned about. Yeah.
Good for you, man. Because I tell you, I've and that's why Amber's story that she shared it touches me because I've lost people as well to suicide, and it's a very difficult thing. And I've felt it. I know what it feels like to be at that place in your life where you feel you're empty and you have nothing left to give. And
for me, it was like I'm walking by the knife in the kitchen and I'm like, you know, like I could just plunge that into my chest. I could
100%. And I remember thinking through, like, in order for them to get the insurance money, how is it that I'm going to do this?
Can't be
like,
suicide, right? Yeah.
Right. And then fortunately there was something in me that kicked in, and for me, I think it's a God thing, but it kicked in and it was like, no. Like I just had to show you this rock bottom so that you knew this is from where you will build, and your identity. And it's funny, the next morning I wake up and the first thing I saw was, now I have 2 kids.
Yeah.
3 now, but then I had 2 kids and they both ran in. And you know what's the darndest thing was? Neither one of those kids gave a shit about what had happened in work or how much money I had or didn't have. What they wanted was, will you watch cartoons with me and eat cereal?
They want their dad. Yeah,
and I could do that. I could eat cereal and watch cartoons with them and everything was going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that barometer to know these are temporal, easy come, easy go things in business. And everybody listening to this podcast, I guarantee you can relate to these fluctuations and swings. I don't know a single person, and I'm really trying to think. I don't know a single person who I would consider to be successful, not just financially, but financially, obviously, life, whatever, as a person. I don't know one that I can think of that if I sit down privately with them and have a glass of bourbon or just a chat, doesn't have stories like that. Failure, epic failure.
And feeling like an imposter, feeling like it was all, you know, for me, I mean, when I was really mentally sick, I couldn't make an offer work. I just couldn't do it. And that was the most devastating thing, because before that, every offer I did for like 6 years took off, every single one. And then it didn't all of a sudden.
What do you think now that if you're able to look back and to be detached from it in some way? And you know, your program is so good, you know, unasked for plug. I think it's just phenomenal. I think that, you know, you, and I don't know if you know Toe Cracker,
I do,
Trevor and Steph and Laura. There's a few folks that I would say are just tremendous in the copy space, and especially the way that you're able to teach folks how to think.
Yeah.
So because you can do that, are you able to think back at yourself and look at yourself almost through someone else's eyes and say, here's what the problem really was. Like, here's where the hangups were.
There were a few things. One was my ego was too tied up in it all. I wasn't able to take a step back from what I was doing and look at it the way I would if I was working with somebody else or whatever else.
So it was I'm Chris, a dad. This has to work.
Yeah, everything I do has to be great. Every single offer I do has to be great, especially in the relationship advice niche. I was also going through a pretty massive mental crisis, so I couldn't really think properly. I couldn't like stop. And I was also on a few of those, some of which did okay. I mean, I wrote a health offer that was a clipping #1 for a while, did a few others. But one thing I figured out recently doing this stuff with my Chris Haddad copywriting stuff is I don't make money if I don't like what I'm doing. I just don't. I don't make money.
Isn't it funny how that works?
Yeah. If I'm not interested or passionate about it, it ain't going to happen. I'm just not going to make, I mean, I might make a little, but I'm not going to feel good about it. The work takes 10 times as long because I don't want to do it. Right. Like all that stuff. And I think that was part of it. And I was also, again, I was just so attached to being a rich guy and being successful, and that need that you know what it was? Here's what it is. I was coming from a place of fear for everything. Right. And early on, like, you know, that 2010 to 2015 or so, when every offer was amazing for me, it didn't make me happy when it went great at all. Instead of feeling happy, like, yes, I kicked ass, I felt like, whew, I didn't fuck it up. Right.
Yeah.
Like I did, it was the best thing anyone in my niche has seen, which okay, that's acceptable. That's good enough as a human being. And then as I got happier, you know, I fell in love with Angie, and she's an amazing, very supportive spouse. And then slowly I came out of my mental stuff and whatever. I didn't know how to motivate myself anymore because I wasn't scared. And without that fear, I did not know how to push myself to the point of working at that very, very elite kind of level. It took me a long time.
Yeah. Dude, I can relate to that. I can relate to that so much because we are addicted as humans to different types of neurotransmitters, right? Yeah. And people will talk about a couple of them because kind of everybody knows it, right?
Yeah,
everybody knows that if you get a dopamine hit, you're going to want more of that. And people will talk about that. People will talk about adrenaline being another one that if you get some of that, you want some. To some extent, serotonin. You know what a lot of people don't talk about, though, that is just as addictive, and people don't really realize it. Your body gets just as used to it and will crave it, is cortisol. The idea of being under stress and having that sort of renin-angiotensin system kicked in. If you get to the point where that's the way that you are used to viewing the world and experiencing the world, and that cortisol is not there, it feels really weird and you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times folks can get just as addicted to that, but for some reason we don't recognize it the same way that we would. I mean, obviously, if you know that someone is constantly getting on motorcycles with no helmet, going 160 miles an hour, or jumping out of helicopters, like you might have a little bit of an adrenaline.
You mean Tom Cruise has a thing?
Right. He might have a thing, but nobody talks about cortisol addiction. And it's just as much. It was actually my friend Tony Collins who told me that she was the one who really sort of illuminated me to that. She's a really brilliant lady who handles more spiritual things with women in particular, but she's the first person that ever brought that up. And I was like, you know something, I think that was me at different points in my life. I didn't realize it, but I was addicted to cortisol, and or at least I knew what that felt like. And if I didn't have it, it felt weird. So I would create a problem if one didn't exist.
Yeah.
So that I would start to feel, more normal.
I know for me, because I got in that car wreck years ago, right? And I'm still dealing with it. I'm still in pain all the time. That's nowhere near what it used to be. But like, you become addicted to that in a way. You develop a relationship with that kind of thing, right? Yeah. The pain becomes, if not a friend, a companion who is there with you all the time. And then as that has gotten better over the years, it's been great, but also kind of devastating in certain ways, like letting that go and letting go even of the identity of being a chronic pain sufferer in a way, because there are so many people who kind of go through that. It's interesting.
So my experience is actually coming from the other side of that same reality, which is I was used to for so long being such a hustle guy and a driver and 60, 70 hours a week. And if it's, I'm going to show up 10 minutes early if it kills me. Well, then I developed a really, really severe autoimmune and digestive problem. I still have it to this day. And it all started. So it started back in 2011 because I was doing, I would fit patients with wearable defibrillators, and I had a lot of patient contact. And I was on a bunch of antibiotics for pneumonia, still working, by the way. And, and I got something called C. diff, which is, I didn't know what it was, but, and it was undiagnosed for 9 months.
Oh no.
For those of you who don't know, C. diff is an extremely violent, painful digestive thing that can kill you, and misdiagnosed. So for, 9 months, it was just god awful. The only way to kill C. diff, at least from a traditional medical standpoint, is essentially to bombard it with the most insane nuclear powered antibiotics known to man. Well, it works. It kills the bad bacteria, but it kills everything. And what I didn't know until, years later, I'm doing all this research to figure out what is going on. You have millions and millions of different, biofilms in your body, and most of them are good. And when you kill all of them, it's really hard to sort of close Pandora's box. And so it creates a lifetime of challenge. So for me, what that meant was, as much as I wanted to still be rooted in the identity of the guy who's just the go-getter and I'm going to get it done, I physically could not do it.
I know that feeling. Yeah.
Couldn't do it. And so then you go into depression because you're like, well, am I even different depression? You know, am I even, what am I even bringing?
Who am I? What am I? What am I worth? Yeah.
Yeah. And so now, to your point, I'm way through the other side of that. And the darndest thing happened. You start to adapt and you realize, okay, well, I can either mope over this and feel bad about myself, and I really don't have any control over it. So the Stoics would say, figure it out. What is it? And then adjust accordingly.
Yeah. Accept it and move on with your life.
Move on. So what I figured out was almost a variation of Pareto principle, which is what I work with clients on.
Which is the 80-20 rule for those who are listening.
That's it. So it's, you know, there's almost always 1, 2, or 3 things in any given day that you can do that are so important disproportionately that if you get them done and you do them well, all the other shit is just kind of like, whatever. Doesn't really matter. And then you begin to focus only on those things. And so it really was, okay, well, if I can only work X amount of time per week, or if I need tremendous flexibility, which is really the bigger thing, how would I go about building companies and work styles and relationships in a life that would allow me to still be valuable and provide for my family, but still have the flexibility to take care of myself? And what happened was, when I started to hone in on the vital few, so to speak, and getting good at the vital few, I made more money. I had better relationships.
And he has shorter hours. Yeah.
Way shorter hours. I've found that 15 to 20 is perfect for me. Anything more than that, and I actually will start doing things I don't even really need to do. To find a reason. And I can ease back into workaholism if I'm not careful. So I kind of have a hard stop.
I don't have that problem anymore.
No, I do. I admit it. I think it's just growing up working odd jobs, and everybody you know is out there busting their tail at 60 years old on a roof or carpent. You know, it's just the culture.
Yeah, it's that whole like dignity of your work thing, which I get, but also life is a lot of fun when you have some money and some free time. Like, I mean, I probably do similar. I probably work, well, these days I work more than I used to, that for a long time, but I doubt I do more than 25, 30 hours a week, even a relatively busy week. And that's great. But that also means, hey, I get to go for a walk later and listen to a book and like hang out with my wife and not be exhausted all the time. So I find that whole idea of like people being like, well, you know, the dignity, you must work your ass off all the time, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, cool, but that's not living. Like eventually, to me, there is this aspect of, you know, finding balance in some way.
There is. And I just think it's misunderstood. And I think work is misunderstood, right? So for me, it's far more important to me at the end of my life for my family to have had a good dad who was there for
absolutely.
Me, who screwed up all the time, but admitted it. For my wife to have had a partner who was there for her and supportive. For my friends to say, when I needed something, he always picked up the phone, always made time for me.
Always there.
Those things require work too. Being good at those things takes work. So there's only so much work you can do during your waking hours, and it really just becomes math. Like, how much of the work product time do I want to spend on revenue producing activity?
Give you the most satisfaction. Like, I do this all the time. I very regularly get messages from people, and I'm quite literally, I don't talk about it very often publicly, but I'm very often just like, I'm trying to help this friend with this thing. I'm trying to help this friend with this thing. I'm trying to be the person who reaches out.
Same thing.
Be the person who's like, hey, I've known you for 15 years and you're sick and nobody else is doing it.
Is everything okay? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Have somebody who's willing to just be like, no bullshit. What's actually going on?
Well, and sometimes that means, I think we now have this kind of relationship where if I started to see something out of character that was behavior that looked harmful, I would privately reach out. I'd actually call you. I wouldn't even message you. I'd call you like, hey, Chris, what the fuck are you doing, man? Are you okay? This doesn't seem like you. Because you have to have people, if you surround yourself with sycophants and yes men, and powerful people do this, right? So if you surround yourself with folks who only tell you what you want to hear, that's a surefire way down a road that's one way, and it does not end in a good place.
My theory on friendship that gets me in trouble sometimes, it's one of my theories on friendship, is that being somebody's friend sometimes means doing things that will make them hate you.
100%.
Right? Like if you really care about, I've had times before where I had somebody who was dealing with drug addiction, dealing with some other things. And I've told them, I'm like, listen, if this ends with you not wanting to be my friend anymore, but you're healthier and happier, I'm okay with that. I will take that on the chin because I care about you that much.
I say it to clients, so you kind of have to be referred to do a one-on-one. There's only a few things that I'll do one-on-one anymore. I have one right now.
Yeah.
An awesome guy, just loved him, what he needed. It was very clear to me that I could help him achieve. But the same thing I've said to him is the same thing I've said for 10 years with anybody, which is if you work with me, chances are I'm going to be the only person in your circle whose only agenda is what's best for you.
Yep.
And what that might mean is sometimes I'm going to tell you things that you really like hearing, but it will also mean there are going to be times where I tell you things that you do not want to hear. And I'm so convicted about that I'm willing to tell you, even if it means you're going to fire me because you need to hear it.
Yep.
And I'm saying it out of love or compassion or, hey, this is popping up over and over and over and over again.
And also just doing the right thing. I think this is the thing too. One of the things that I think you and I, again, like once we would chat over Messenger and I'm like, I get this guy, right?
Yeah.
So I think there is a certain aspect of like both you and I are like, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to do the right thing. It may well cost me actually, it has cost me friends. It has cost my wife and I had a whole thing last year where we knew some people who were lying about being vaccinated, going to parties, doing things like that. And I called it out and there was a tremendous cost.
Oh, I bet.
But it had to happen. But I'm like, I can't be who I think I am as a human being and not say something.
There is right and wrong. I tend to, I will say this. I'm getting better at understanding gray than I used to be. I am. Yeah. But there is right and wrong.
Yeah.
And when it comes to harming other people, where it comes out in business a lot is, I know multiple people, and you're probably one of them, who has had folks respond that they are responsible for, whether it's an employee or a vendor or something, and something goes south, maybe for you or your offer or your business or the channel of your business, and it's a negative impact to you financially, significantly so. You have a choice at that moment. You can cut your costs and the personal loss to you by stiffing these people.
Yep.
Or you can just say, you know what, I'm going to take it on the chin. And because it's the right thing to do. This is not their problem. This is my problem. You can do it anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
To me, that's the only course of action.
Again, that I feel similarly. It's almost, there's another thing that I've dealt with over the years that I don't get, which is I've had conflicts with people where they've ripped me off, right? They ripped off one of my letters. It happens all the time. And when I confront them, they're like, oh, it was my employee that did it. It was my employee. It was my copywriter. And I'm like, I have just lost all respect for you, just so you know.
At least own up. Yeah.
At least, like, even if that, A, of all, it's not true. It never is, right?
Yeah,
B, of all, even if it were true, like I've had times employees have messed up and cost me 50 to 100 grand. And I've gotten mad. We've had some I don't scream, but we've had some conversations about it. But anybody outside the company, I took responsibility. Like it's my company. This is my thing, whatever. Like that's just the 100%. Way that I personally think you should be doing things in your life and in your business. Yeah. But I also am one of those weird people who thinks like taking care of your people makes them better at what they do and not having like, I don't know about you, but I think 3 full-time employees. I don't know what hours they work, generally speaking. I don't care what hours they work. I know if they need a day off, you can have a day off. Tell me about it ahead of time and get your work done. And it's okay. Like don't treat your employees like children, treat them like human beings.
It's funny.
And get rid of the ones who can't do that, right? If somebody just shows you that they cannot take autonomy and be self-motivated in some way, you get rid of them. But I just think you get much better results when you treat people like with respect and like human beings.
Well, and it makes it more fun, right? So you said something earlier about kind of we all have these rules and you start to develop them. For me at this point, I don't want to work with people that I don't like or respect, and I just won't. Doesn't mean
I'm even past the asshole tax at this point. Like even there's people and I'm like, you cannot pay me enough. I'm sorry.
So our friend Kev would call that he has a no MFer rule. Yeah. And Kevin's taught me a lot about how to, especially when it comes to folks who do some sort of consulting or coaching, anything that involves clients. Yeah. A sneaky important thing is to know how to vet out somebody that might be an MFer and really could cause you a disproportionate. If you run masterminds or anything else, it's even more important because one bad apple, same with an organization. If you have one bad apple, it can become a cancer to everyone. Yep. And so trying to figure out how to find those people and to eliminate them, because you're really, I think when you're leading an organization, you're leading a group, anything like that, you're leading a movement. Yeah. You're a curator in many ways. You're trying to curate an experience and a culture that will allow folks to become the best whatever. Corporation, you're all trying to move toward the same. For you with the Pig Method, it's trying to help people to understand what the best way is to really tear apart copy and to write in a productive way that gets results
Yeah,
using
totally.
kind of a specific thing.
Yep.
Well, with either one of those things, if you got the wrong folks in there, it could be just catastrophic and disastrous because it's going to take so much of your time and attention to deal with this.
Yep.
So I don't work with people I don't like. I can't work with people that I don't respect, even if I like them.
Yep.
So if I like you but I don't respect you, that won't work.
Yep.
And then really that's kind of it. Like I have to enjoy it. There's a lot of weird things that I enjoy. I think people get caught up in Mike Rowe,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
dirty jobs guy.
Yeah.
So he said something the other day that I don't always agree with everything he says, but there's a lot
Yeah,
of
but he gives such a valuable perspective.
oh, it's unbelievable. And
Like as somebody who is not working class and has not been working class for many, many years now, I find that to be a very, very valuable. I spend a lot of time like reading Reddit threads that are from people who work at gas stations and truck drivers and shit like that, so I can understand like
what's a reality check, because the truth
really
is,
yeah.
there is a point where it's been so long for me, even since I did anything manual,
Yeah, me too.
that it's important for me to remember that sometimes. And so what Mike was saying was essentially it. Actually, I think I just forgot what we were talking about because I was so distracted.
Fair enough.
It'll come back to me in a second. But
Yeah.
I do think, to your point, a lot of these high-minded ideas we have, it sort of becomes a thing where it's like, there is a base level, right? There is a base level of you got to feed your family, you got to do the right thing. And there's an ethos, I think, and a culture that comes from making sure that you can honor what's important to you, and you can do that in a way that isn't disparaging to somebody else. So like if I say, hey, if I meet with somebody, which happens every day, and they pitch me something, or they pitch me to be involved in a business that they want to grow, usually it's something that's at this level, they want to grow it to here, and they're not sure, and they bring me in to help them get there. Well, there's this whole process that I'll go through that's pretty informal, but it's basically me trying to figure out, like, one, are you crazy? And if you are, which of course you are, because we all are, but is your crazy going to step on my crazy? Is that going to be a problem? And am I going to enjoy working with you? Now I remember what it was.
Oh yeah.
The subject of the business. So whether it's a roofing company, a painting contractor, a landscape company, a software with a really cool, game-changing artificial intelligence attached to it, fintech, doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Folks get caught up, and Mike Rowe talks about the idea that folks get too caught up in, well, I need to find something that brings me passion and then I love.
Sure.
Well, true, but you need to find something that makes you money first. And then if you become good at that and you figure out how to do it, passion can be built after.
I always say, when people say do what you love and the money will follow, I'll be like, well, do what you love, and if it's something that can make money, the money will follow.
It's a really important qualifier, because there's a lot of things
playing with your yo-yo all day. I ain't gonna do it. I'm sorry, this ain't gonna
listen, man, look at our space, right? Look at the space that I've accidentally found myself in, this direct response space. I've met some amazing people who, if you took Stefan, Laura, Glenn Ledwell, I could name 30 people that I've met who I think are awesome. Amber, you take those people out of this and you put them in a new industry, new culture. I guarantee you that those people within probably 30 to 60 days will have figured it out and will be doing this fine.
Yeah.
Because they have transferable skills that could be used anywhere. There's another side to that, though. There's a lot of influencers who look successful and have no real skills. They don't have
any skills. Here's another thing too that I try to tell people. Most people are full of shit in business.
Full of shit.
Like, absolutely. Like, I'm not. I try really hard not to be.
I'm probably painfully not full of shit. Like I sometimes say things I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, there are times when I say things when I'm like, shit, I am big in something I did a little more than I meant to, or I didn't say gross as the way I'm like, no, this is a gross number kind of thing.
Yeah.
But like this, even going to the Costa Rica for the ClickBank, I'm like, oh wait, I know that guy's full of shit, because I know that guy. Like, I know legitimately these people are full of shit, and they're getting on stage and they're saying all these things and whatever. So for folks who are listening, whenever you hear anyone brag about anything, know two things. If somebody brags about something, they don't believe it. Plain and simple. You don't brag if you believe it. You just don't. And whatever they say, at least cut it in half, and you might be vaguely close, right?
That's
in
like
some cases, it'll be like 1/10, honestly.
It's the old locker room, like middle school adage, where at that age, up till about early 20s, hopefully it ends there, guys. Hopefully mature a little bit, but up until that point, guys want to brag about how many women that they've slept with. And so what the old adage was with guys, you cut it by like, it's more than half. You multiply it by like 0.1, and with girls, you multiply it by like 9 because they don't like to tell you. So I do think there's something to that. And that's I will say this, the advantage of being in mergers and acquisitions as sort of what I would say my primary thing is. There's about 20 things off of that hub that I enjoy and that I do. But I've been in a lot of negotiations, just a lot. And you do develop a muscle memory for figuring out when folks are full of shit. So because that was me before I came into direct response, I have to admit I think it's a little easier for me to pick it out, and I don't have a lot of patience for it. So there's really only a handful of folks that I've met that you're one of them that I would consider like, man, I would really, anytime I'm in this guy's city or he's near me, I would love to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Beer. Same with, other folks that I've met, because they're just, what you see is what you get. My wife drives a Honda minivan. I drive an Acura 5-year-old car.
I have a 6-year-old Subaru with 11,000 miles on it.
Yeah. Cause I don't value those things. They just don't really,
I don't care.
Have I driven a Lamborghini? I have. It's not comfortable. I'm 6'2", almost 300 pounds. Yeah. I can't fit baseball shit in there for my kids. It's a terrible. So,
Subarus are really useful, man. You should try one.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the same with the Acura. I think an Acura is just a slightly taller Subaru.
Yeah.
That's real, right? And folks don't have to come very far to figure out where I'm coming from, because I'm also transparent when I F things up, which is a lot.
Yep.
So I think when you get to do really cool things with really cool people like I do, like a guy like Jason Myers, who's done so many amazing things, and now he owns all the guerrilla marketing stuff. And when you get to have conversations with really bright, talented people like him and many others and like you, what the common thread with all those folks is you want to make a difference that's positive. And whatever it is that you're doing, you want to try to do it well, and to try to do it with integrity, and then to have a lot of fun in the meantime.
That's the goal. Yeah. But the way I grew up, honestly, like my dad was an entrepreneur. He was a sales and marketing rep for like shampoo and stuff like that. Right.
Yeah.
And he always told us growing up, he's like, you're going to work for somebody else for a few years, then you're gonna go off and do your own thing. My brother didn't do that. He still works in corporate America, but still the way I grew up was like this, the overall idea in like middle classish Massachusetts was work is a thing you do that you hate doing. Right. Like that is
right. Me too. Same.
That is what a job is supposed to be. You are not supposed to enjoy it.
And if you like it, you're doing something wrong.
You're doing something wrong. Like you are not supposed to like it. You are supposed to go there and suffer through it, very Catholic kind of thing all day and despise it. And that's what a job is. And it took me a really long time to like I'm working right now, but I'm having a great time. But it took me a long time. It took me a long time not to feel guilty that I was doing something I enjoyed, if that makes any sense.
It completely makes sense, because that's what it is. It's a guilt, and it can permeate a lot of things, and I think it can screw you up. It can make you make bad decisions. Because sometimes what'll happen, especially with men, is we'll start to self-sabotage. Like if things are going too well and the business is killing it and moving along, if you're not careful and have a good feel for your emotions, and also have people in your life who know you and can speak into you, you might start to do things that are self-destructive that you don't even realize that's what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen so many people get, what advice do you, here's an interesting thing that I run into sometimes, having been around a long time. I oftentimes find myself in a place where I'm talking to guys 10, 15 years younger who are exactly where I was 10 or 15 years ago, right? So like they had jobs that they didn't like. They thought they were losers. They thought they would never get anywhere in their life. They got fired from everything they did. And then all of a sudden something went really well. And they have an offer that became a big thing on ClickBank, and they made some money or whatever else. And I always sit these guys, whenever I can, I sit them down and I try to give them some advice. When you are inside this situation, what advice do you tend to give people, do you think? Because I'm assuming you've been there.
Yeah, I get a lot of calls for advice and different things. Usually it's relational things, but sometimes it's mindset and business. That exact person that you described, I always just try to say, listen, something you're going to realize over time. Take this for what it's worth. You're never as great as they say you are, and you're never as bad as they say. It's never as great as you think it is, and it's never as bad as you think.
And you're not a genius.
You're not a genius. You're also not a moron. So it's the more, there's something to be said for being able to live. Not that you don't want to experience highs and lows. That's being human. That's the great part about being human. But the healthy thing is to try to figure out how to sort of live in this never too high, never too low space
I
where,
hear I'm on a great medication that does that. It's awesome. You should try it.
yeah, that's it. Just
Cuts off the top, it cuts
right
off the
there,
bottom.
cuts off.
My wife asked me how I stay calm while things happen in our country, and I'm like, honey, I'm on really good medication.
Really good medication. Yeah. I,
Mhm.
I'm not on medication. And I think it's just, here's what I tell people. Like, well, how do you stay so calm in crisis? Because I'm very good in crises.
I'm
Probably better.
calmer in a crisis than
I was
I
going
am.
to say, I'm probably better in a crisis.
I'm just like, oh, okay, I know what to do. No problem.
Here's what we're going to do. Here's a 9-step process to get us out of here. Um, I just think that it's experience. And I always tell folks, well, it's real simple. If you want to get good at staying calm in crisis and handling difficult situations, just fail a lot and get kicked in the teeth a lot and punch in the mouth, either literally and figuratively. And eventually you just start to develop a sense of, okay, I've been in worse situations. I've seen a lot worse. This is not life and death. Nobody's
Yeah.
going to die. That's what
Well, I
it
think
is.
so, talking about your health stuff and talking about my health stuff, like I'm not scared of shit at this
No.
point in my life. I'm not scared. I mean, there's things I don't want to happen, quite obviously, like health things and things like that. But I've had my ass kicked pretty fucking hard in a
Yeah.
wide variety of ways, and I'm still here. Like I'm still here and I'm still going. So
I'll tell you from my own experience, what changes is when it comes to me, I feel exactly the same way. It's hard to offend me personally. You can
oh
say
yeah,
whatever
totally.
you
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah.
I'm way past the point where I care too much about what people who are not very close to me think.
Who gives a shit? Yeah.
And I don't have a lot of fear. I'm not afraid of death, truly.
Me neither.
But-
The only thing I'm afraid about dying is leaving my wife behind and how that would affect her.
So you just,
Yeah.
so when for kids, it's my
Yeah.
fears now all revolve around my kids.
Yeah, makes total sense.
I'll tell you an interesting story that everybody here will be able to relate to and probably think is cool. So my mother's high school English teacher was a little known author named Stephen King.
Great. Yeah.
So she grew up in foster care, tough background, but she found herself in high school in Hamden, Maine, which is not too far from where I grew up. And Stephen King was just getting started, probably getting his teeth kicked in, probably getting denial letters from publishers back then, especially.
Oh yeah.
And I can't remember if it was Carrie or Christine that he was writing and had sort of almost gotten published then, but he was teaching high school to pay his bills. And my mom was one of his students. And so years ago, somebody asked him, I guess, way before he became Stephen King now, like his first few books, they were dark. Like this dude's got some dark stuff that he comes out with. Fascinating stuff.
He had a lot of alcohol. He had alcoholism. He had a lot of crazy shit.
He had alcoholism. And somebody asked him, like, how do you come up with all of these terrifying scenarios and characters in this books? And he said, a lot of them come from nightmares I have about things that might happen to my children that are like these freak out fears I have. That's where my fear is as a dad now. Like if you want to get me fearful, have my child at least real or perceive be in some sort of danger.
Yep.
And I will, because men generally react to fear how? Rage. That's what we replace it with because it's a more acceptable.
Yeah.
Emotion.
I mean, I have a whole program where I talked about this, where I explained to women the idea of the only emotion men are allowed to have, right?
Do you? I didn't know that. It's so true though.
Yeah, my Michael Fiore stuff, I talk about a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'm also a relationship expert, it turns out.
I've been wanting to ask you about this. Like, are you ever somewhere, the mustache might make it because you do look very different, but are you ever somewhere and someone's staring at you and they think
not lately. Back when I was doing more of that stuff, like 7-8 years ago, I was on television sometimes. I was doing a lot of stuff as Michael Fiore, and I've had several occasions where somebody came up to me at a restaurant or whatever else. My mom has had a couple of things happen because my mom's maiden name, or my mom's last name is Fiore, which is my alter ego's last name, and so she's
there is a tie-in.
There is, yeah. It's my mom's maiden name and my middle name. If you ever want an alter ego, that's the easiest one to come up with. One that I can. But yeah, she's had experiences of like people being like looking at her thing and saying, "Oh, Fiore, I follow a guy named Fiore who does that," and she gets to say, "That's my son," and she gets really proud, and it makes her really happy, and it's pretty cool. Yeah.
That is cool. That's actually very sweet.
Yeah, it's very. I also had a stalker once, so that was a whole thing.
That's not fun.
No, she flew all the way from Atlanta. This is a woman who, I'm sorry, I talked about this on the podcast or whatever before. She was a woman who was on Michael Fiore's list for a long time. And sometimes people who are in mentally difficult places can start feeling like they have an actual relationship with the person sending them emails, right? All the time and watching the videos. And so she fell into a delusion where we were in love and dating, and she flew all the way to Seattle to try to find me.
Oh man, that must be awkward.
I mostly just felt bad for her because you can't engage, right? Like I talked to some people about this who have been famous-ish and things like that. And they were just like, listen, no matter how big of a heart you have, because again, I deal with bipolar. Like I am very, very empathetic to people dealing with mental crises, but you can't engage. Like if you engage at all, it just makes things 10 times worse. You need to just back away and not communicate. It's too bad, because I like to help people when I can. It's a thing.
That's really what it is, right? Do you have a heart to help and steward other people? You can't do it for everyone.
No.
But I think that's where it all comes from for me, is trying to figure out in the way that I can show up. How can I show up and help this person? And
the key to happiness is helping people. Like we know that. Like every single study that has ever been done about anybody who ever is happy is the less selfish. And again, I was a very, very selfish person for a very long time, because the narcissism that comes with bipolar in particular is really, really brutal. And it makes you, it's why I understand sociopaths. It's why I understand like malignant narcissists and things like that, is because of that. But I just forgot where I was going with that whole thing. Jesus, my brain is mush today. Either way, anyway. Yeah.
I think both of us, and so many other folks that I know who I so enjoy conversation with.
Yeah.
It's a bit like your brain is, Microsoft Windows.
Yeah.
You have, well, actually, Chrome would be a better analogy. And you have like 57 tabs open.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You're like going back and forth between the tabs, and sometimes you get so many tabs open that none of them will load.
Well, I love talking to ADHD people, because I grew up in Massachusetts, where you talk like this thing the entire time. You never slow down. You never enunciate anything.
Yeah, wicked hard.
Look at how I do it. It's a fucking piss off. So it's nice when I talk to people who also bounce around all the time and aren't really worried. Actually, I love going back home and talking to Massachusetts people, because I can just talk twice as fast as I can
normally. Do you find yourself, so I've been in Atlanta now, for those that don't know, I grew up in New England, was there until my early 20s, moved down here, been here now for 15 years. Mm-hmm. And you adapt to wherever you live. The South is unquestionably, everything is different. Everything is slow.
Everything's slow.
Can't be as direct, I've learned.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find yourself going back home and you feel slow compared to other people?
A little bit. It takes me a while to get back to, because again, I was known as being blunt and direct for Massachusetts when I grew there. When I grew
that's saying something.
Yeah. And then I moved to Seattle, and I was still that person. Well, I was in Seattle, where people are very passive aggressive, and people will not just say, like, this is my biggest complaint about Seattle is I am not conflict avoidant. I am just like, we have a conflict. Let's talk about it. We're done. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like if you and I ever had an issue, I would just call you up and we'd be, hey, there's a thing going on. Can we talk about it? And 10 minutes later, 10 minutes later, we'd be fine.
Your mustache, I'm not okay with. Like,
exactly. Whatever it is. Whatever it was. But we would just call each other and it wouldn't be a big deal. Here in Seattle, people don't do that. They will do everything they can to avoid having a 5-minute easy conversation that solves things. It's really interesting.
So, you know what? I did a program. I'm not going to say the name of the hospital because I know there's at least 2, so I won't get in trouble. But I did a major program in Seattle. It was one of the most difficult I've ever done because of the communication and everybody. It's funny you say, I just remember it. It was very passive aggressive. I remember writing that at the top of one of my comments, extremely passive aggressive workplace.
Yeah.
The only other place that I had experienced that was New York.
Yeah, I can see that.
Brooklyn,
interesting. New York City. Brooklyn. I can
didn't expect, but it was just, there was a lot of, and passive aggressivity to me is, as a leader, is one of the most dangerous things in an organization.
It's toxic, man. It's fucking toxic.
It really is. Just come out with it. Like whatever it is, come out with it. Let's learn to.
I would rather somebody just call me an asshole, like, and just be like, hey, I think you're. I'm like, okay, cool, let's talk about it. What did I do? I will. If I did something wrong, I will apologize for it. And if I didn't do something wrong, I will say, well, here's why I don't think I did anything wrong. But thank you for talking to me.
Well, so I get the best of both worlds, because growing up in that blue collar, very direct environment, and then having to move here where I would say something and folks would just shock and horror of what just came out of my mouth. I learned how to say something, as it will say in the South, with just a little bit of sugar. Yep. And so it's a little bit of the best of both worlds, because I can still be direct, but I think I've learned now, it depends. If you say something about my kids, you're just going to get the unfiltered raw,
Oh, dude, I always tell people I am a very nice person, and you can say whatever you want to me. I don't care. You can insult me. If you go after somebody I care about, you will see bipolar Chris come back, and
that's it.
Yeah.
I'm not even bipolar, but I was a wrestler, and I have that kind of aggressiveness underneath. And so I've
got it in there. Yeah. If somebody goes after somebody, I think we talked about this on chat though. Like, I think both you and I just naturally see ourselves as protector types.
High protective instinct.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
And
like, I'm always like, I've taken plenty of hits. I can take more. I'm not worried about that, which is not necessarily healthy, mind you, but there is that aspect where I'm just like, I know you're not going to be able to hurt me. So I'm going to put myself
Yeah.
between you and people I care about. Yeah.
Same. And I am maybe to a fault. I'm a very loyal guy. So like it's admittedly, I will fully admit it can be difficult to get into my inner circle. It's really hard.
But
if you're in there, you're in there. And so you're seeing a manifestation of that recently in the news. And I don't even need to give a specific because anybody can think of a dozen. Where so maybe two folks that are well known and one person does something just totally inappropriate. That's awful. Just shouldn't have done it. Terrible thing to do. And then what'll happen is, the cancel culture we live in now, will try to cancel. And this is not a political thing because it's happening across the spectrum.
I am not a fan of cancel culture whatsoever.
I don't like it at all because it removes the possibility for growth and healthy dialogue.
And you got to be able to say stuff and understand where people are coming from, right? Like
even learn like, hey, oh, well, that's the consequence of me saying that. Like you're entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to freedom from consequences.
Yeah. That is the weird thing when people are like, well, it's free speech. I'm like, yes, you can say whatever you want. And I can react however I want to
any way that I want.
And if you're a racist, I'm going to call you a fucking asshole and like you. Like,
or misogynist, or if you say something,
whatever.
So, where you see this manifested, this loyalty thing, and people don't understand it is, and I can give you an example because I think a lot of folks will get this. So Morgan Wallen is a well-known country guy, country singer, and I'm pretty eclectic in my music, so I listen to almost everybody. Well, he got in trouble probably, I don't know, 8-9 months ago because he said something that was racist, which he then admitted was racist. He meant it as a joke. It was a stupid thing to say. He shouldn't have said it.
Yeah.
He paid pretty dearly for it, but he owned up to it and came out with it. Well, another country singer who's actually far more famous than him is a guy named Luke Bryan, I think. Not Luke Bryan. Another guy. Anyway, who was a really good friend of his and stayed a good friend of his and was like, hey, he made a mistake here, but that's my friend. We're going to work through it together. And I admired that because what you normally see is, I can't believe that they did that. I would never say that. And I'm, all of a sudden you're not friends with them. I'm not wired that way, man.
I've said all sorts of shit. Like this is the
stupid shit. Like if there was, that guy's in his 20s, I think.
Yeah.
If social media had been around,
oh my God,
many times in my 20s,
oh my God,
I would not have a career. No. And I'd be so embarrassed for my kids.
I said all sorts of shit. Plus I was just when you're young, like you're just trying to impress people more than anything else. And you're trying to hide, for me at least, like especially as a guy, you're trying to be tough and funny.
Posturing.
Like I even look at trans jokes, like transsexual jokes. Like 10 years ago, I made those jokes. I made one of those jokes on fucking stage at a John Carlton conference once. Yeah. I'm not happy about it now, but I was young and I didn't know I live in Seattle, right? So I know. This is the thing too, for people that I know who are like, don't enter trans. I'm like, yeah, but I know people that are like that and they're just human beings. But I also try to remember when I'm talking to friends of mine other people, like they don't know anybody. They never met a human being who has gone through that and experienced and like actually had like a real conversation with somebody and understood that it's a real human being going through that. And I try to be understanding of that perspective as much as possible.
Well, and the thing is, it's like baggage, right? So everybody comes into a relationship or an engagement with invisible suitcases. I'm a very visual person, so I always have to think of what this would look like if it were real.
I have no ability to make pictures in my head. There's a thing called aphantasia that I never knew. Like I was one of those people say, close your eyes and picture something, and I'd be like, you mean that metaphorically, right? You don't mean you actually picture.
You don't literally mean that.
Yeah. When I finally found out they literally meant that, I was like, holy crap, what am I missing? It's crazy.
So like the analogy that I'm about to give, I'd be really interested afterwards to see if I physically did it in front of you, if it would be meaningful versus to say to you won't get. But I always think of it like the trans is a great example.
Yeah.
Or I would say the feminist movement and the Me Too maybe even better because what that's become. I think both people come into that with baggage that's real, that shit that's happened to them in their life that they've experienced, that's informed their opinion, their view, wounds, whatever that is. And then you put the two bags together and it's like, well, how the hell is this going to fit together? And how do we figure this out? What I think it's helpful for me to remember is, despite my, what I think are my best efforts to understand someone else's opinion, whether I do or do not agree with them, I'm still trying to advance ultimately what is my agenda, unless I'm able to stop and say, well, maybe I'm wrong, which is a hard thing to do. Well, the other person is trying to do the same thing. So if they're trying to advance an agenda because they feel like they've been, really probably have been badly mistreated, they're going to try to advance the ball. Maybe the 50-yard line is fair. Well, they're going to try to advance it to the goal line because that's just human nature. So I think that's what happens. Is sometimes we get in this push and pull of, okay, well, it's okay to talk about these things. We're fine with that. Maybe we should be okay with this. Well, no, now that we're okay with that, now I want a little bit more. And
Yeah.
everybody does it because it's
Yeah.
human nature. And
Yeah.
I think that's where shit goes sideways is, do you want to, and this doesn't matter really what we're talking about. Most human beings say they want equality.
Yeah.
They don't. What they really want is slight superiority. And it doesn't matter, truly in my experience, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a business deal, whether
Yeah.
we're talking about a social identity that we have, whether we're talking about
I can totally
a
see that.
political movement. Most people want to believe that they want equality when they really want superiority. And then the other problem is, what I want to do as a human being is I want you to judge me based upon my intentions and what I meant.
Yeah.
But I want to judge you
On your
on
actions.
your behavior and your actions.
Yep.
And there's really, at our best, we can flip that, where I'll say, hey, Chris, this is what you did. It kind of pissed me off, but I think this is what you meant to do. Let's talk through this and work through it.
Yep.
And then I'm going to say, even though I intended something, that's not what I did. I really screwed that up. Let me own that. So when we reverse it, it's usually when, but it's fucking hard.
Most people are terrified to do that. They will never do
so
that.
hard because it means you're a failure.
Well, people all the time will be like, oh, well, anyone who cheats on their spouse is a horrible son of a bitch. But when I did it, there was
totally different. Well, here, let me tell you the reason.
Like, listen, this happened and that happened and blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, like just pick one.
And you know what that always sounds like in an argument? And here's how to catch yourself doing it.
Yeah.
If you say to somebody in one of those tense exchanges where really you're feeling like you might be a hypocrite and they're calling you out, or you're trying to prove why the thing you did is not the same. Anytime you hear yourself or someone else say a variation of this, but Chris, you have to understand there's about to be some bullshit that comes out that absolutely. You, if played back to you, would even say, okay, that was a little bit of bullshit that I just spit out right there. Yeah. And it's, and I'm able to hear it myself as I'm saying it. So the reason that I would say I'm really blessed to have a great marriage is because I can look back unequivocally at times when I was like, you were a fucking asshole. Like, what did you think was going to happen when you said that or did that or behaved this way? You did have an anger problem and you did fly off the handle at stupid shit that you shouldn't have, because like a lot of men, I would just say nothing for 6 months when something was annoying me. And then all of a sudden something that deserved 1/4 ounce of anger got 45 tons. And it just was this explosion.
It's never about what you think you're fighting about. It's
never. And so
it's not about the fucking dishes, I promise you.
No. So what I used to do was I'd be like, well, you did this and behaved this way and said this, and it made me. So it's deflecting and abdicating my responsibility for my behavior to my wife. It's like, well, you're the reason that that's bullshit. It's not her. Now, was she perfect? Of course not, because she's got her own baggage.
She's a human being.
But I own my behavior, period, full stop. And I'm responsible for her. And the same is true, I think, in business. Man, I don't know if you've experienced this or anybody listening. There's not a lot of things that I'm sensitive to and will get me fired up. The one that I am is when I hear people say, they'll see a post that I made, we're doing something fun as a family, or I'm, traveling somewhere, and I'll make a post and they'll happen to notice behind me that I'm sitting in first class or whatever.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Must be nice, or I wish I was that lucky. Those are two things that I usually don't respond to them, but every now and then I get pissed because I'm thinking to myself, fucking lucky. Think about your story and all that you had to go through and the gut checks and continuing to get back up and all the shit. Like, yeah, it was lucky when this, and this happened. Were you there then? No, you weren't there then. Yep. There's nothing to do. Now, does everybody benefit from a little bit of luck and happenstance?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Absolutely.
But
I would not be where I am without a few things just being easy for me in my life. No. Like, neither would you.
Never. Yeah. But I would also say the reverse is true. You've probably overcome things that a lot of people just wouldn't to get to where you were. Oh, yeah. And I also think a lot of folks have opportunities that they've missed where they didn't recognize it, because the darndest thing about luck is that it never knocks on your door and screams out, "Hey, I'm luck. Let's have fun." It always comes in the face. The way it's dressed is, it looks an awful lot like hard work.
Yep.
And it's difficult, I think, to see the difference. Successful people are not there because they're just lucky. They're there because they figured out the skill of being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always find it interesting when I meet people in business who were born into it to a degree, right? Who were born, who like,
Great
it was
question.
their dad's company and now they're a senior VP or they even run the
Very
company.
different than a
Yeah.
first gen person.
Yeah. And they never seem to feel good about it, right? There's always that aspect of just like, I didn't earn my way here. This was given to me. And they feel almost jealous of folks like you or myself who were like as self-made as you can be. Like, certainly there's plenty of things that went well. Yeah.
And it's funny, I would call those the self-aware ones, and you can work with that, as long as they're not malignant, or you can help them work through that and say, as long as you're not, either way, just like you or I were not in control of our means when we started off, and we had to build from there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't automatically look down on someone who inherited something, as long as they took it to the next level and on their own are competent. I would never.
And as long as they weren't incompetent, but thought they were brilliant, right? Which I always love that.
Exactly.
I'm like, you have no idea what you're doing.
No clue at all. And so those are the self-aware ones. The ones that are challenged are the ones that they want to take credit for the success of something they really had no part in achieving.
Yeah.
And that's not just people that inherit, right? So there have been some things in the last 15 years that have happened in our country that a lot of people have made a ton of money, and they mistake thinking it's because they were brilliant, when in reality they're just,
I know.
This is where luck does come into it, but they did the work. But Amazon FBA is a great example. You don't see a lot of folks newly becoming millionaires from that today, moving forward, and you won't. I've built and sold 2 companies in that space, and it's different. It's different now than it was before. Direct response, you would know better than I do.
It's a lot harder than it used to be.
I bet. I'm going to guess that in the early mid 2000s,
super easy. Even the early 2000s. I mean, for me at least, the early 2010s were, because that's when I really got started and really started to make some money. But it was, back then it was, you could be a guy in his basement with one VA and do pretty well with things.
It was Tim Ferriss, right? The 4-hour work week that really sort of.
4-hour work week blew a lot of things up for a lot of people. It's a really big thing. It's harder these days. But I don't mind it. I like working these days. It's fun. It took me a long time to get over it not being as easy as it used to be. Back when I could just like put an offer out and magically traffic would show up back in the day. Instead of having
I bet.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So the changes that have made, if you want to get into the weeds a little bit, it's just fun to talk about these things.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about, iPhone made these changes, Facebook, blah, blah, blah. We can't do lookalike audiences and be as direct with our targeting. In some ways, I don't know if you would agree with this. You're far better at copywriting.
Sure.
You'll know, you've forgotten more than I know.
Yeah, sure.
But just from a general understanding people and why they make decisions in business, I'm thinking to myself, it can't help but make you better.
Yeah.
Because you have no choice, but you can't use any tech hacks. You really have to do the work to understand who are the people that I'm trying to target. And if I can only target broadly, I have to really segment how I'm going to get those folks to respond. What do you think about that?
But you got to think about what kind of offers you can put out too, right? Like I have a thing in one of my courses, the Escape Hatch, which is a course I do. It's all about like
underrated, by the way. You included that with Pig. People, if you
that was an upsell. You bought that.
Oh, all right, fair enough. I paid for it, but
you pay for that. No, it's a really good course. It's something I'll probably. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing next with these things at this point. But that course is all about like how to actually create offers from nothing. Yeah, and a big part of that course is talking about language of desire, and how I turned that from what I would consider a 1-quadrant offer into a 4-quadrant offer. And the idea there is like the quadrants for me in that one are married or single and young and old, basically, right? Are you 25 or are you 50? And that particular offer started off as a dirty talk offer, language of desire. But the reason it was so successful is that I didn't make it a dirty talk offer. I made it a more general, broad, save your relationship or make your relationship better offer that I could push out to more general traffic, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Dirty talk offer specifically that felt like a dirty talk offer would not do as well. And it's very specifically that offer too was designed, hey, this will work whether you're married or not, right? That gives me a much broader amount of traffic that I'm kind of able to go after. Same thing with Make Him Worship You, one of my newer ones. When I named that offer, it was like, okay, Make Him Worship You, that works for your husband, it works for your boyfriend, it works for this guy you're dating, it works for anything. And that was very, very much on purpose.
That's brilliant, man. It really is, because it's about if the information that we're trying to convey to people, and I think this is true whether you're teaching leaders, you're trying to educate partners, you're trying to move an organization forward, or you're just one-on-one coaching somebody. Ultimately, the information that they need to go from where they are to where they've ideally self-identified that they want to be, or where the organization needs to go. If that's the butter, it doesn't really, you're just trying to figure out how to get that butter into the person's mouth. It doesn't really matter if it gets there with a spoon, if it gets there on some bread, if it gets there on a biscuit, if
some
it gets
way
there,
or another, we're making it happen.
somehow, some way, we have to take that thing and we have to get it into the person. So the medium that we use can change, but in reality, the butter is whatever the program is that you're trying to help somebody get through. And man, that's super brilliant.
Well, we've gone about 2 hours now, so I think it's probably about time to slow it down. This was delightful. I've been looking forward to this. I'm like, hey, I get to hang out with JB and get to know him a little bit and see where things go for a while. It's fucking great.
Me too, man.
Anything you want to promote or anything you want to say to folks before we dish off here?
I tell you what, we'll be moving through, Jason and I, that software program in a few months. We're putting it in the early stages. So if you're a SaaS founder, really it's anything as a service. So anything that's sticky and you're just not quite sure how to really scale it, then reach out and we'll have some early conversations. Or if you yourself are in a business and you're exhausted and you're dying, and the earlier part of Chris and our conversation, you're not quite sure how to remove yourself from that life, reach out to me and I might be able to help you.
That's great. Well, dude, thank you so much. This was super fun. I'm looking forward to seeing how we get to know each other next time we get to hang out in person.
Likewise, buddy. We'll compare facial hair.
We totally will. All right, cool.